Hey, and welcome back to another video. In this video, we're going to continue looking at walls. This is a full playlist on walls, but in this one specifically, going to look at some of the very intimate details of walls, something that you may not get into all that much, and honestly, I don't. But before we get into it, I do encourage you to look at all the previous wall videos in the playlist up until this point, because it'll give you a better overview and better idea of where we are and where we're going. But of course, before we actually get into it, if you would please demolish that like button, really helps me out a lot. Okay, getting into things now. We're looking at walls, and of course, in previous videos we looked at instance properties, type properties, and more, all the layers and everything. But we are going to go into the assembly itself and take a deeper dive into the specifics there. So of course, we're familiar with the type properties. Of course, we got our preview window. And we want to look at the structure. I don't know why it's called structure, but it is, because as soon as I get in here, it's called assembly. So the main thing here, and then I've actually made a duplicate of this type and added edit to the end, so we can play with this and do everything that we want to for this video. And I can expand the preview, and I can see absolutely everything that I want to see here. And you'll also notice whenever I do expand the preview, we can see all of our vertical structure options, buttons, whatever extra tools become usable. And this is exactly what we're going to focus on, specifically these first four here: the modify, assign layers, merge regions, and split regions. So they're very complicated, or at least they can be complicated. I'm not going to say they definitely are, but I will say that they're not something I use a lot. But I will say, again, this is something very specific, and if there are reasons to use this, I can't say at the end that I'm going to fully recommend this, because at the end of the day, you can achieve what we're doing here to this wall in other means and other forms of modeling. But the idea here, and really the advantage of doing what we're going to do as far as editing this wall, is that it becomes a part of the wall. It's all a part of the wall. We can basically do we can take it as far as we want, but at the end of the day, it is still one single wall, it's a nice advantage. We have all of our joining properties that are going to work really well together to other walls, of course, because we're not basically adding anything to it. We're not taking anything away from it, because at the end of the day, it will all be within this wall. So getting into it now, we've looked at all the different layers, what they do, and you can see as I select them, I can see that they are highlighted over here at the left in the preview. Also notice in the view, you have to be in section for these extra vertical structure tools to be available, and you can see it actually says section preview only, and that is because of how we're editing, what we're doing. Everything is in section when it comes to these specific tools. So first, modify. This is perhaps the easiest to understand, and will give you an idea of how the others might start to work together. But we're going to actually end up coming back to a lot of these tools as we get to the others. So modify. As soon as I click modify, it's hard to see, but I can see that I can highlight any of these different lines. And there's a lot that I can do. Now the nice thing here is that if I highlight and hover, I can see this is the border between layer 1 and layer 2. Well, that's very obvious. I can select layer 1 and layer 2, and I can see that that's the border in between them, which is cool. Not that that's that much difficult, but I can click modify, and of course I can highlight the bottom, and I can see outer boundary, and if I go to the top, I'm probably going to see something very similar. Again, outer boundary, yes. So, what is this doing? Well, I can select this, and I can see that I have my temporary dimensions that come up, and these temporary dimensions happen to exactly reflect the thickness that I have for each of these layers, both the brick and the air, 3 5/8 and 3. It's right there. The cool thing about this, and it's cool, it's not, it's useful, it's not at the same time, is I can change this right here live with these temporary dimensions. I can change this maybe, 4 inches. I want this air to be 4 inches. Well, that's going to literally change my wall in section here. And then, of course, I have my 2 5/8 brick, which is odd, but also my 4-inch air gap, which is fine. But you can see the cool thing is that those numbers are reflected here in the thicknesses. And that's what we'd expect. I can change it back here to 3 inches. Of course, the thing to note here is that because I'm not affecting the temporary dimensions, the 3 inches here, the inch I added back or took away from is not added back to the brick. You just kind of know that if you're changing that up here. And so we finally have our overall thickness. The thing to be aware of here is if you'll know if you're changing everything like actual dimensions if this total thickness changes. So I'm 1 7/8. Just kind of know that going into any sort of change that we might make here. So that's that's the quickest and easiest way to use the modify, but we're not done with that, so we're going to come back to that. The next, I'm actually going to jump to split region, and you'll see why here, but I'm going to jump to split region. I would say that this is the most fun part of what we can do with these different settings and tools when it comes to walls and section. So split region, as soon as I do that, you can see I get what we're used to seeing as like the split, kind of the split tool in the normal modify tab outside of walls. And so at this point, we can actually start to split a specific layer of this entire wall system. And the cool thing again is that we do have these temporary dimensions that come up and show us exactly where. You can also see which specific layer you're starting to affect, or you actually would end up cutting and splitting as a result of doing this. And so it's kind of works like the offset tool, if you're familiar with that. You can hover on one side of the line and then kind of slightly move to the other side, and you can get the offset to one side or the other, which is the same here. I can cut one layer or the other by using the same center line. So let's add like a real world example to what we're doing before we start changing and cutting this wall up. Let's say that, there's a couple of ways you could have brick terminate at the base of a wall. Maybe you have it go 2 or 3 courses below grade, and perhaps that you do that, but maybe more it's a residential where you have kind of like a slab, and so that you basically have the grade ending in a slab, and then above the slab, a few inches above that, you'd have the brick actually terminate. And that's kind of what we want to do here. And so there's not some special number to that necessarily, but let's say that, a brick course, or at least a few inches above grade, is where we want to have this brick actually start. So we'd end up having, we're basically showing this as a floor, even though it's a wall. So I'm going to stop saying floor, but let's go ahead and cut this, and you can see what I'm talking about. So again, I want to cut the brick probably one course up, so maybe 3 inches up here. And so I can cut that at 3 inches. And you can see I actually get this 3 inch that shows up. I can see a new cut line, and I actually have, it's all part of one layer, but it's something that is now split. And so this does technically nothing to my actual wall because I've split it and that's it. I haven't done anything else to it. And so at this point, what can we see? Well, I can see here that because I have split that layer, the thickness is now variable. And now, why is it variable? Well, it happens to be variable because I now have the option of splitting, well, not necessarily splitting because I did split it, but I have the option of changing the top layer or bottom layer, whichever one of these layers within the brick that I've split. I can change one and have it be different than the other one. And so that seems a bit confusing and weird, but I'm going to show you just a second how to do that. And the reason you might want to do this is because of that real world example. So at this point, let's go ahead and I'm going to go back to the Modify tab. And as soon as I go, remember, the Modify tab is just going to select different lines and different edges of layers. And so I can see that, well, I can actually select not only the brick layer, but just that specific layer that I've cut. And so I can actually change this here again, and I get, of course, these temporary dimensions. But let's say I'm going to have the brick come all the way back to the sheathing. This is not normal, but you'll see what I'm doing here at the end, and it's going to all come together. So maybe I want to change this dimension. Maybe I want to have the brick come back another inch or two, and we can actually change this to like 1 inch. So we can see what happens. Like, clearly now my brick is variable, and also because this brick is now essentially penetrated into the air, now that is also variable. So not only is it variable, but I can't change it here at all. Everything is kind of dependent on coming back to the section view to edit it. And you can start to see like why this might be useful, or really more of the pain that this can create and why you might not want to use it. Now, I'm not going to stop the video just because of that, because there's a lot more to cover, but you can start to see why you may not want to do this, and how you could also just model this in a different form, different fashion, different way of doing that. And so with these both being variable, at this point, we have, we can continue to make changes within these layers, but they're always going to be variable unless we have a consistent dimension that is falling with that entire air barrier. So the nice thing is that I can continue to select these different layers and see which parts are associated to it. And because I select the finish here, that happens to be brick, that brick does end up coming back because I split it and pushed it in, which is kind of interesting. So for this example, I'm actually going to change this metal stud to concrete. I want this to be more like a concrete wall instead of an actual metal stud wall. So there we go. That looks good. We can really start to see everything here. And so we have this, which is great. But what I want to do is, like I said at the beginning, the real world example part of this is that I want this concrete structure to basically come underneath and be a part of the floor, like as if we're going to start the floor here and then just have the brick start higher, 3 inches higher than normal, where we have this floor continuing out to the edge and all of that. So let's start to put these things together. So finally, what we have not yet covered is merge regions and assign layers. So if we wanted to assign layers, actually I'm going to save assign layers, so let's go ahead and merge regions. Well, I don't want to necessarily merge regions yet because I have some more splitting to do. Remember, we want to take this concrete structure all the way out to be the kind of the pseudo floor underneath this 3 inches gap, 3 inches of brick above. So basically, let's continue to split at 3 inches on all these other layers. And I know it's going to look kind of weird, kind of confusing at the time, but you'll start to see how it all comes together. So there's my 3 inches there, and then 3 inches here for the air. And the cool thing is, if I, for some reason, could not cut exactly where I wanted to, I can just cut it anywhere, and using the modify, I can select that, and I get my temporary dimensions, and I can again make that 3 inches, which is great. So I have this line all the way across back to my structure, because I want to now make this, basically all of this concrete. And so what do I do? How do I do this? Well, there's a couple ways that we can do it. And then the primary way will be to merge the layers. So let's go ahead and merge layers. And so with this selected, there's not much we can do. But what we can do is start to select layers. And so I want to actually select the actual concrete layer, but I want to basically start extending it. And so this is going to work very similarly to the modify, in that it's going to work with edges, but only the edges between layers, not the top and bottom. Top and bottom that I've split. You can see here I get like this bar that shows an arrow going in which direction. Again, this is the same as the offset, one side of the line versus the other. And so basically I want to push this concrete out, like all the way out. And so I can see here I get this one edge that's the 3 inches that I want, and I want to actually push the concrete out to the next layer, in this case to the left, to the exterior. And so we can see, there we go, and even hovering over I can see that says border between layers 6 and 4 after merge assign will be layer 6. And so we can see layer 6's structure, which is saying that the concrete is going to then take the place of my substrate, which is on layer 4. Okay, so let's go ahead and do this. So I click that, and clearly we can see what's happening. So basically, my sheathing is coming down, stopping on top of this, I guess you could call it an extension of the floor or extension of the wall, whatever, but it's concrete. But I want to keep doing this. Again, I want to push this out, and now concrete comes out to there. And again, one more time should take care of the rest of this brick. And so let's do this right here, all concrete. And so this is very interesting. I'm actually probably going to do this one more time for consistency's sake. I will go to split, and I will split this last layer here. Of course, modify that so that's actually at my 3 inches and not some weird dimension. So there's my 3 inches, and then we'll finally come back to merge and then push this out there. Great. So, okay, this is not necessarily something I would recommend doing because of how this is going to end up being modeled, and I'll show you that in the end. But you get the idea here, because what's happening is that I have my brick coming down, sitting on a slab like it normally would be, if it's not actually going below grade. But either way, you'll have some sort of brick ledge, whether that's above grade or below grade. And we're saying in this case, this is going to be above grade as opposed to below grade because this is a wall. And so with that, I have the brick stopping at 3 inches. I have the airspace, of course, stopping at 3 inches. I've got my sheathing and all of that that's attached to my concrete wall, all stopping at 3 inches because I have my slab continuing. That it makes sense. And so this is cool. I mean, this might be what I want. So let's go ahead and I'm going to save this, and we can see that's my wall. So with that done, let's take a look at our layers in our wall again, and we can start to see that there's quite a lot that's locked down. And so basically everything in gray is locked down. I can't change the dimension. And so the brick obviously is 3 5/8, that's what we want. Same with the air. It's all 3 inches, and that's just because everything that is falling within that layer has not been changed in like the horizontal plane, in this case, in the XY plane here. So that's cool, and we see that. And of course I can't change it here because I've cut things up and changed it over here. I have not changed the dimension of the membrane layer, but we wouldn't want to because the membrane layer is still basically 0. The substrate, of course, we've done the same thing all the way up here. And the only thing here to note is that the actual structure, which is in this case the concrete wall, is showing up as variable. And that's showing up as variable because I have extended basically that layer all the way out to the edge. And it doesn't matter if I extend it at all. The fact that I did means that I don't have a consistent dimension for it. And you can see once I select it, we actually see every single thing here, which is exactly why this is variable. That's exactly why. And again, we have our membrane layer on the other side, which is showing up as 0, of course. We don't need to change that. And then my gyp wall, which is stopping right there. Of course, that's what we would expect to see. Okay, so let's go finally into assign layers. Now, this is the one I would probably least recommend. And just like before, what we did was we ended up merging regions horizontally. I would only really use assign layers vertically in this case. It is a bit hard to understand, but it will work kind of the same. And we're actually going to do it kind of both ways here. But what we're going to do is, again, split. And what I want to do is maybe what we want to see something like a drainage mat here, something like that. That's kind of the best example I could come up with. And so it's going to appear differently than the air, which is showing up as nothing. But maybe we decide whether it's a drainage mat, anything else like that. Maybe we're like sloping, sheathing, anything like that. Blocking, whatever it might be. At this point, we want to actually help drain things. Of course, it could be a drainage mat, it could be anything. But let's say we want to add a bit of blocking down here to actually show that. And of course, we don't want that. We don't want that to look like air. And at the same time, I don't want to add another layer that is, specifically for that, because it wouldn't make sense all the way up because it's only at the bottom. So let's go ahead and split this here, and it doesn't necessarily matter where. Another 3 inches is probably pretty good. And so at this point, maybe I decide, well, I don't want it to look like the air. I'd rather it take on the properties and everything of my actual sheathing. Well, what I can do is I can first select a layer that I want to actually use as the assigning layer. So in this case, I want my sheathing. I want my sheathing to be used, but what I want the drainage mat or blocking to look like is the sheathing. So what I can do is select the plywood, the sheathing here, the layer 4, and I can click assign layers. And so basically this is saying I can select any layer here that I see, and I can have it take on the properties being the function and material of that layer. So because I want the drainage mat or blocking to do that, I just need to select it here, and we can select that here. And look at this. So what is our result? Well, it's somewhat similar to merging, but it's not actually merging. So what is happening here? Well, we're now getting, of course, a variable thickness from our plywood because it's now taking on this extra width here at this portion that isn't consistent all the way up. So that's something to be aware of too. But now we can also see that that drainage mat is appearing and taking on the function of this plywood, which is kind of what we would expect to see, and that's what we want. That's the point of what we're doing here. And so that's great. We did that horizontally, and it might be that you want to chop this up more. But the point with the assigning, whether it is horizontal or vertical, is that you're not actually merging together. You're just giving the properties of another portion of the layer. And so once we do that, we're kind of done at this point. I can say, okay, I'm good to go. But notice that it is different than merging because they're not actually together. We still have this line that is technically splitting them, it's not splitting them, but it's literally the one layer to the next. And so that's the way to look at it. Whenever I select the air, it's only filling up that area there, and then the area below that is just the sheathing, and then it happens to include this new portion that's specifically for blocking. So, why would I go to the trouble of doing this? What is this for? Well, it's specifically for sections because, we're in sections. Now, at the end of the day, I'm probably going to end up drawing lots of detail lines and detail components, but I want to have my model at least 90-95% correct when it comes to that. And if it is something, if this is something that's along your entire exterior, it's probably worth doing it if it's 1 or 2 wall types. If it's a bunch, I wouldn't really bother with that. I would just kind of plan on detailing that later on. But besides that, this is going to impact the model completely. It's all built into the model. It's all built into this wall, which is awesome. So let's go ahead and click OK. And there we have everything. It's cool. And it's not going to change much here in plan view, but I'm going to go to section, and we're going to see exactly what we want to see. Of course, I need to change this to fine, and we can zoom in here and see, would you look at that? That's exactly what I expected to see. Also, I'm going to change the scale a bit so we can see all the detail. And look, that is exactly what we modeled in section, like actually in the wall type, which is really useful. I can change this to consistent colors, and we can see exactly what we saw. So really nice. This is looking good. Again, this is a great base point to whatever you might want to do as far as detailing, like you kind of have an idea, well, I've got some sort of a drainage mat or blocking or here. I might end up angling this down, whatever it is. But anyways, this is a good starting point, and which is kind of the point of modeling, because you're going to have to spend time detailing it. I'm not a fan of someone who turns everything off and then just details over it, because the model means almost nothing at that point. But I'm also not necessarily going to only show the model. I'm not going to model absolutely every single detail, as much as I'd like to. It's just so hard to do that, show things graphically correctly. But anyways, we're to a good point here. So how might we finish this off from a level, like actual modeling standpoint? Well, the weird thing here is that my finished floor wouldn't technically be on level 1. So let's go ahead and draw a floor in here. Obviously my floor is going to be 3 inches, whatever it is, but I don't know. It kind of is what it is. And this is not necessarily the way I'd love to do it, but we are going to do it this way. So let's go ahead and just concrete here. Actually, I'll take this generic. I want to duplicate this, have this be my 3 inches, which, again, I'm not necessarily a fan of that part of it, but that's okay. So again, I want to make this concrete. With that being concrete, good to go. And because of where we modeled everything else, I'm actually going to put this on the very, like the actual interior side of it, which again, this is not normally where you draw and like actually sketch in a wall or a floor. You'd have it extend beyond this point, which is just why I don't necessarily like doing this. But again, if we look in section, we could see that, well, this is starting to make sense, but I actually need to bring this up, like we said, that my finished floor is at 3 inches. And so now you can see this is making perfect sense-ish. This is making perfect sense-ish. If this were actually 3 inches, it would make more sense. Of course, I can join these two together, and that looks good. And you can start to get the idea of what's happening here. We actually have grade. Maybe grade is coming up to this point, and it's doing that. Well, yeah, this is somewhat normal, except the floor would continue out and whatever. So at the same time, it's like, well, why did we bother doing this? I don't know. This is the type of thing that I would probably pick up in detailing, because going to all the trouble of doing this, it's really not worth it. Unless you're trying to do something like this for 3D purposes where you want to actually see where the grade would hit and then have it show concrete above until you get to brick, whatever, that's fine. But otherwise, this is just better to do in detailing, quicker and easier, because then you're stuck with having to deal with this kind of oddity in modeling. So like if this were actually 3 inches and I did update the thickness, it would look okay in section, but this may not be correct. I don't know. It's kind of up to you. But at the same time, also, if you wanted the finished floor to be at 0, then we're starting to do dumb things where we have maybe that at 0. And that's fine. That's kind of where you'd have the floor at 0, whether it's 3 inches or more. But at the same time, if you wanted to achieve that with the actual wall, we'd have to actually put a -3 offset on this, which, again, it's not the end of the world. It's just kind of silly to have to do that for a wall. And then maybe our grade is coming here, which we're more normal. It's no more normal. We'd expect to see that, but I don't know. You can start to see how this is useful, when you might use it, and when you might not. I don't know. I cannot say that in my many years of using Revit that it's something that I've used a lot. I've used it a very, very small handful of times, and that's like less than 5. At least gone to the trouble of making all these layers. And the reason I might do this is if I want to have multiple layers in multiple places vertically, perhaps the best place and like the best use for this might be if you're doing some sort of a wainscot. And now we'll get into like sweeps and reveals and all that next time, but maybe what we want to do here is actually split this, and maybe we want to split this up, a few feet. We can put it anywhere we want again, and then modify that up to be, maybe a few feet up here. So let's split that and modify this, and maybe want that to be, 2.5 feet. So great, it's right there. And so maybe at this point we want actually this portion to be a different material entirely, and maybe it's a different thickness also. So again, maybe at this point it's, some sort of blocking system or a stone or whatever. And so again, maybe we want to modify this to actually be a bit thicker. And so maybe this is actually, we have just a 1.5 inches of air. And so we have some sort of a blocking system. Well, we don't want it to look like brick. Yeah, of course we don't. So how might we achieve this? At this point, we'd actually have to make a new layer, which is completely interesting, but let's go ahead and do that. I'll go ahead and insert. I want this to be behind the brick, just mainly for my sake, and so it makes a little more sense. So let's go ahead and move that down. and I want this to be finish 5, just not necessarily priority of finish 4, but finish 5 behind the brick. And I want to make this material maybe a stone. Let's go ahead and make a stone here. So this stone will work, and I have it basically showing up as kind of like this blocking, and that's fine. And of course we can see that the actual thickness is 0. And so I could actually, I can't actually continue this because I can't have a thickness of 0 without a membrane layer, and I don't want this to be a membrane layer. So basically I have to give this layer some place to go, like literally do something and actually serve more of a thickness of 0, basically do something. And so if this is 0, we can't actually finish this. So this is exactly where I would assign a layer. And so with this layer selected, the stone material, I can assign a layer. And again, I want to click this area where I want this wainscot of a stone to go. And so I can click this, and immediately we could see that my thickness is variable, because not only that, I need to reconcile some of the area down here, but I actually see my stone, which is really nice to see. So I've got my stone coming up to this point of where I have brick. Great. And so let's go ahead and finish modifying this. So let's modify this back to 1.5 inches of airspace. And now we could see that I actually have my stone, which is 5 1/8, which makes absolutely 0 sense. But regardless, it is consistent. And because it's consistent, we can see that we have that solid number there. The problem with that, not necessarily a problem, but the thing to note is that it is grayed out, which means I can't change it. The only place I can change it here is in section. So very nice. So, that's going to do it for this video. I'm going to go ahead and update this so we can see all of this show up in section right there. Looks really nice, I guess. There's a lot here, but that's okay. If this is the type of thing you want to do, you've got a great place to start your detailing. You got your wainscot, and all these dimensions are set, and they're hard into the actual wall itself. Looking in 3D, we can see that, yeah, this is showing up pretty much exactly the way I want, except I haven't put the offset on this wall, of course, here. I took it off here. And so with that, we could see, yeah, looking pretty good, nice and consistent. Not the most amazing thing, but nonetheless, it's decent. That's what we want, at least from a section standpoint. So that will do it for this video. Please stick around for the next one, which is hopefully coming out pretty soon, because we're going to look at basically finishing this wall, looking at sweeps and reveals and everything else that you might want to bake into walls. I feel a little better about baking those into walls than I do some of these components that we went through. But nonetheless, I hope to see you in that video, and thank you very much for watching this one. If you happen to learn something, which I sure hope you did, that's maybe why you're here, then please demolish that like button. It helps me out quite a lot, and I really thank you all who have. So again, see you in the next video. Have a wonderful day. Thank you very much for spending your time here and watching this. I'll see you in the next one.